So the Dugan case was a case of someone who had been convicted of 2 previous capital offenses, murders, and he was on trial for the 3rd capital offense. And the defense sought to present evidence that he suffered from psychopathy, a personality disorder. Psychopathy has a long history of research showing now that there are affective abnormalities or problems in affective development. And they wanted to make the argument that he suffered from an extreme mental or emotional disturbance at the time of the crime. He suffered from psychopathy, and that might be potentially mitigating. And so they introduced evidence. It was one of the first times, to my knowledge, they introduced evidence that psychopathy was potentially mitigating in terms of a mental illness. The only issue to be decided was whether or not he would receive another life sentence or whether or not he would receive the death penalty in the state of Illinois. We also introduced, for apparently the first time in court, the use of functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI. And fMRI was used to help support the claim that there were affective disturbances in his brain in terms of the limbic system and how it processed different affective, moral, and other types of cognitive control and attention variables. And so that was apparently the first time that fMRI was used in court for mitigation purposes. So we don't know everything that the jury basically decided or did, but in this county, the jury in death penalty cases normally is out just for a very short period of time, several hours, and then they come back with a death penalty conviction. It's a very conservative county. What happened in this case was that they were out for 2.5 days, and they requested additional transcripts be read back to them about the testimony regarding the fMRI. So we believe that it was useful for their deliberations. The jury actually returned after 2.5 days of deliberation with a life verdict. But as they were coming back into the courtroom, they requested the judge discuss the case with them, and he went and discussed it with them, and one of the jurors expressed reservations and went back, and then the judge sent them back to deliberate, and they came back 2 hours later with a death verdict. And so that's actually under appeal right now because of the circumstances around it are not typical in the United States that a judge would give instructions to the jury without the lawyers being present. But he did receive a death sentence, and so he is currently on death row in Illinois. The judge basically in chambers discussed the verdict, was handed the verdict by the bailiff, read it, and the jury said, one of the jury members who wanted to vote for life said, well, I still have some, I'm not sure yet. So there was a lot of controversy about this because there was a lot of media around, there was a lot of press, there was riot police around. There was a lot of press about this case because of its history, a 25-year history. 2 men were wrongly convicted twice of this crime and sentenced to death. They spent, I think, more than 10 years on death row for this crime that they didn't commit, and so there's been a long history. But so that jury then went back to deliberate some more. I came back 2 hours later with the death verdict. That was all that was entered in court. fMRI is a technique that allows us to take pictures of the working brain. So just like when your muscles use oxygen to move your fingers, so do the neurons in the brain that control those fingers. And so it was used to try to examine whether or not he showed reduced activity in his brain in the limbic system. That is the emotional areas of the brain. And in general, fMRI right now is used clinically for, like, if you have a tumor or something and they want to map out all the areas around the tumor, whether or not you're going to remove the tumor and adjacent tissue, would you be removing certain brain functions with it? And so in this case, fMRI is not diagnostic of psychopathy. It's not got specificity yet to do that. It's simply one additional variable that was helpful in addition to all of the other psychiatric testimony that helped to indicate that his behavior and potentially, and obviously his brain, was a little bit different. And so that was really the only thing that it was used for. We do not have a diagnostic measure yet for psychopathy based on fMRI. We just have some potential indicators. In addition to the functional MRI, we also presented structural MRI analysis that looked at brain density. And there we found also that Mr. Dugan did have reduced density in the very psychopathic range, according to other studies that my lab has conducted, and other labs too, in different limbic areas. So it was those 2 pieces of information that were both presented to the jury in this case. I think fMRI is a helpful technique. It's as helpful as often a lot of other psychiatric information that's presented. And then as we continue to develop the science, I think it'll be used more frequently in the legal system to help us understand when brains are different, and then that's the challenge to the legal system, is then how does it deal with when we know we have someone who has a different brain or different processing, how do you deal with that?